I want to welcome you to Gardening in the Mountains. My name is Allison Arnold. I'm the extension agent here in Buncombe County, and I'll be your host today. Now, this program is pre-recorded video. However, our speaker is here today to answer questions. We're excited about that. Welcome to Gardening in the Mountains. What about conifers? Michael Balow is the owner of the Mountain Meadows Nursery, specializing in landscape conifers since 1982. The nursery is located at the Forks of Ivy, not too far north of Asheville. Michael has been involved in the gardening business for many years, and before starting the nursery, he owned a landscape design and installation company where conifers were a major component of his designs. He has served as president of the Southeast region of the American Conifer Society, and now he enjoys working with garden and bonsai clubs and offering nursery field trips and garden education. We are so very happy to have him here today to help us answer that important landscape question, what about conifers?
We are here at Mountain Meadows Nursery, just north of Asheville, and we're looking at a vast array of plants in all kinds of nursery areas, in propagation areas. You can see so many different colors, shapes, heights, forms, and these are all what we call gymnosperms or conifers or evergreens. Michael Balow, the chief plant guru and owner of this nursery, is going to be talking to us about that in just a moment. The array of things here is remarkable, and it's worth coming out just to see more evergreens than you have probably ever seen in your whole gardening life. So we're here now talking with Michael, the owner of this fine nursery. Michael, what do you want us to know about these wonderful plants?
I want you to know that in a garden, they do everything that flowers would do. They just do it differently. They add interest at different times of the year. And often they're going to add interest when nothing else is going on. So what we have here, this is a hemlock. This is a white-tip hemlock called Gentsch. It's a good place to start. This is a native plant. And we're always looking for native plants, but not all of this is native. But it's hard to sort out what is and what isn't because it's been evolving for hundreds of years, brought into this country. But this guy actually grew up here. And this hemlock wants to live in the full sun. Most people think that hemlocks grow in the shade. Nah. This is Plum. This is a gold one. This is Korean gold. And then we grow a green variety, so you have choices. Whatever your color palette is, we have something to go along with that. This is Plum. This is going to end up being, in 20 to 30 years, 8 feet tall and about 6 feet wide. And then to his right, that's a thing called a Cryptomeria. Cryptomeria is from Asia. Very useful plants, durable. Heat, water, they do it all. They don't care. They live in the shade. And we do a number of varieties. That one's called Kukumiya.
This one looks very compact in the pot. How old is this plant?
This plant is probably around 12 to 15 years old.
Oh my goodness, and it's about 2.5 to 3 feet tall.
Correct. And it's going to look like this year-round. It's going to look like this in the middle of winter. It's going to look like this in the spring and in the summer. We just came out of a hot summer, and it looks this good. So this is Cryptomeria, just to confuse things, where we just had the small guy. This is the same genus, same species, a different variety. This is Cryptomeria Giokumo. This is a screening plant. This will get 30 to 40 feet tall and about 10 foot broad at the base. So if you're trying to hide your neighbors, this would be one of the guys to choose.
If it was in decent soil, how long would it take it to get 10 feet tall, do you think?
10 feet tall. So the growth would be this much a year, 10 to 12 inches a year. So you do the math. It'll get there in short order. In 10 to 12 years, it's there. And if we get to it, there's a big one out in the back. This is called Elkhorn Cedar. This is a variegated Elkhorn Cedar. This is Thujopsis. This is going to be finishing 25 to 30 years at 10 foot tall and 15 foot wide. Likes to live in the shade. And behind that is a gold variety. This is going to be more tree form. It's called Aurea. And again, this is a sister kin to what our native arborvitae would be in Asia. Arborvitae are as tough a plant as we have on the planet. These guys tolerate all the stuff. Once they get established, they just say, bring it on. We're going to make your yard gorgeous.
We're looking at part of the nursery here, and we're seeing just a vast array of colors. And I'm wondering, how do we use these trees in the landscape? How do we decide what we want? What do we do with these yellows? What do we do with these blue-greens? Tell us a little bit about the colors.
This is a white pine, and it's a yellow white pine. This is called Louie. And this is going to be a standard sized tree, but it's going to grow at about a third the rate of a regular white pine. So you can use it for screening. You can use it for accent.
It's really yellow. I look at it and I say, this tree needs nitrogen.
But it's only going to get more gold as the season goes on. As the frost gets onto it, it's going to be brilliant gold. So through the winter, it carries the color through.
And right next to it, the blue.
It's a blue balsam fir. It's called Tyler blue. And this is how we tell how much a plant grows. This is terminal growth. This is how much it's going to grow per year from the last node, the growth that it put on this year.
So that grew about 12 inches this year.
That's correct.
So that tells us how fast it grows.
How fast it grows per year.
Then how do we address the question of how tall it's going to get overall? When does it stop?
Okay, so plants are a lot like people. They're going to grow at that cadence for about 50 to 60 years. And when they get up around that height, they're going to be like people. They're going to stop growing up and start growing out. But they're going to be around a lot longer than us. So the real question isn't how big does it get, but how long does it take to get to a specific height in a landscape before it needs to be tended. One of the theories in landscape is you use a plant for the period of time that suits you. It may get too big in 20 years. Anticipate taking it out and putting something else in its place. Because it may be that you absolutely love this plant, but you know that it's going to get too large for the area. With that, we can then do things like this little mugo pine. Terminal growth on this little mugo pine is about 2 inches. So it's in that same cadence. It's going to grow for 2 inches a year for the next 50, 60 years. So now we have a better idea how it can stay in a landscape and not have to be moved. Okay?
Now I want to look at this color question some more, because this is just fascinating. Now I'm looking at this tree. I don't know what it is. It's got fairly long needles, and the centers of the needles are yellow, and the tips of the needles are green. Tell us about this one.
This is called Burke's Red. This is a Japanese red pine. In 10 years, it's going to be about 10 foot tall, and it's going to be about 10 foot broad. It's going to develop cones. The bark is going to turn deep red, so it's going to have attributes as it gets older through the year. It feeds the birds. All this stuff is for wildlife. The birds come and feed off the seeds on this stuff. This character wants to be in full sun. If he's in full sun, if you could turn to your left, let me show you what he looks like in 10 years. He's that thing right there. And as winter comes around and it gets colder, those colors become more vibrant.
Amazing.
And that has not been pruned. We don't prune anything here. So this is the way things grow. Okay?
Looking over here, I'm seeing some low-growing, fairly bright yellows and against some blue-greens, some standard greens behind them. It's just an interesting palette.
It is. So the little gold things that we see that are the lowest, those are junipers. And they're going to be that color year-round. A lot of times people are nervous about golds until they own a gold and live with it for a year or two and watch what it does. And then all of a sudden they become a fan of gold.
Where would you use a gold?
Any place you wanted to brighten up a spot. Any place where you needed to punctuate or bring the eye to an area. In landscape, we usually try to use plants to draw the attention. So when things get used, it's because of their form, whether it's narrow and upright as an exclamation, or because of their brilliant color, and other attributes that they might have. In the foreground, this is a Japanese white pine. And we'd use this because of the cones. This is first-year cone. This is second-year cone. It's going to grow, again, about 8 inches a year, and it's going to be the same height to breadth ratio. We would use this in a landscape as a punctuation but it's not going to get very big. On the other hand, this is miniature white pine. This is called sea urchin. This grows an inch a year. So you'd want him in the foreground or someplace where he just didn't get lost, or used in a container. And he's going to do all the white pine things. He's going to have cones. He's going to be evergreen. He's also a good place for birds to hide if they need to. And that's what all this stuff does. It hides all the critters that need to hide when the hawk goes over. And then to the right, that's a Korean fir. That's called silverlocks. That's going to be a tree. That's going to grow to be a 40 or 50-foot tree. That's the backside of the needles. The needles recurve around the branches. And it will always be like that. Adolescents for these characters are 10 to 12 years old. So when it reaches that height, it will start to develop cones. The cones are going to be a cobalt color. Yes, sir. And the cones on firs grow up. The cones on spruces hang down. So there's all this interest that happens in the garden if you start to pay attention. This is a miniature white pine. This is called Horsfords. And if you look, they're on a stick. And that stick is called a standard. That's grafted. We choose how high we want to graft that. And that's just for the interest of the plant itself. This is where the graft is. We grow the standard. We keep the limbs pruned off so it's nice and clean. And then we graft a piece of this onto the standard. And when that melds together, webs together, we cut the upright piece off and this thing stays. Now this is how big this thing is going to be. It's going to grow about an inch a year.
The standard won't grow taller.
The standard will not. We have cut the terminal out of the standard. So this is the plant now. It grows this much in each direction every year.
Where in a garden would one use a plant like that? That's just an unusual look to a conifer.
You could use this in amongst perennials. Being on the standard, it would be noticed. You could use it in containers. These could be on the patio year-round. This could be a feature plant. You could have one to flank the walkway on either side. It has enough interest to be able to carry its own throughout the year, whether there's plants around it or not. It's one of the things we can do with plants on a standard. It could be featured in the center of a yard with a bed around it. And in gardens, we want people to ask questions about, what is that? I don't know what that is. And then find out it's an eastern white pine, so it's a native plant. We just helped it along. This is a blue spruce. This is a weeping blue spruce. This is called the blues. And the question is, how big does that get? It grows this much a year, so that's about 8 or 10 inches a year. We keep it attached to a piece of bamboo, so we have control over how high it gets. At the point where we don't attach it to the bamboo anymore, the top will do this and fold, and now it's not going to get any taller. It's just going to have more mass. It stays relatively narrow. What's on the bottom is going to become a petticoat, so it's going to be a ground cover in a bed. You can keep this at any height. You can preordain how large you want it to get so it doesn't get in the way. And if you have a big, tall stepladder, you can make this thing be 20 foot tall. So that's the versatility of this stuff. Always amazes me. This is Abies concolor, or white fir. This one's called blue cloak. This will get 12 to 15 feet tall. And then, as it grows, all the foliage drapes. You can see on all of these, it just drapes and it stays very narrow. So now you've added brightness into a garden, and you have this accent, so it stands out, whether there's things that are planted around it or not.
Yeah.
Narrow. An old plant would be 12 to 15 feet tall and probably 3.5 to 4 foot wide. Quite narrow. It's well behaved. This is white pine again. It's on the standard. This is sea urchin. And we do the same thing. We get to choose where we want that to be. And you get to choose where that's going to look best in your yard. And because we're doing this thing with natives, and this is white pine, this is native white pine. The guy behind it is white pine, and that's native white pine. And that's called Stowe pillar. You can see the form on this, and all it's going to do is continue to grow. This is 12 to 14 inches a year. It's going to be this narrow. It will get 35 to 40 feet tall, but still be 3 to 4 foot in diameter as a smokestack. You could use this as a screen, or you could use this as an accent on the end of the house, an accent in the middle of a bed, just to draw attention to that area. And this is the same plant. It's getting later in the year, so the pines are starting to color up on the inside. They're getting ready to drop. It's another attribute of the pines, is that they go through color change. The oldest of the needles are going to do this. Then they're going to turn a russet color, and then they're going to fall, just like the leaves fall off the trees. So this same plant, just older. When they get older, they start to develop cones. So now they have another attribute. And again, it's a food source for the birds.
It is an evergreen, that it has some green on it all year round. Doesn't mean that these needles are immortal.
That is correct.
They are going to fall. Do they fall every year? Does it shed some every year?
Shed some every year, often either from the 3rd, 4th, or 5th year of the needles that are on the inside. They keep putting new stuff out. When the needles that are deep inside can't get enough sunlight, they're going to go through the color change, and then they're going to drop. And that's going to happen anytime from mid to late summer all the way through the fall. All the pines do that on their own cadence, but the whole group of them do that at the same time. If you don't like it, you can always go in and shake them out, or you can take a garden hose and spray them out, or you can leave them go and appreciate what they're doing for you. And they're going to create their own mulch around their base, and that's a good thing. And then if we move to here, this is native white pine. This is called tiny curls. It's a genetic anomaly. Somewhere along the line, somebody collected seeds from a pine cone. They grew those seeds on. The mother to this is called tortuosa. It has curly leaves, but not quite this curly. Then it got old enough to have seed. Somebody collected that seed, grew it on, and genetically it morphed again. This is tiny curls. This is going to grow at a rate of 3 to 4 inches a year. In 15 to 20 years, it's going to be maybe 6 foot tall and 6 foot wide.
Let's pause here and see what questions our participants have.
Okay. Gosh, wow, this is really amazing. I had a question about the white pine. I think you called it pillar.
Stowe pillar. Stowe, S-T-O-W-E.
And is that based on the person that identified it?
I think that's true. I think he came out of Vermont, and it was found by a fellow named Stowe, who owns a nursery.
Amazing that it's that upright. And you talk about using it as a screen. That could be really interesting.
If you used a few of them, 3 to 5 of them, and you staggered the row, it would make a really effective background or screen.
Okay. Any problem with, not that we've had snow in a couple of years, but I think white pines are they can withstand some load, but I'm just curious about your experience with that.
So we've been growing these things for over 30 years, and we've seen the snows come and go. The things that didn't hold up, we stopped growing. We stopped promoting those. So the ones that tended to hold up were the ones that we continue to grow. And I guess there'd be a variable to all that, and it's the ice storm, the dreaded ice storm. All bets are off.
Yeah, gotcha.
Everything will succumb to heavy ice.
Yeah. Okay, so back to the tortuosa. It was a rounded one, or was it a tall standard?
It's a tall standard. It gets to about 35 to 40 feet.
Okay.
But it's open on the inside. It can be used any place in a landscape where you want to be able to see through the landscape, through that plant. But the attributes are still there, and it's still an attractive plant. It has pine cones and does all the white pine stuff, but it's just not used for a screening plant because it's not going to be full.
Okay. All right, good. What are the sun requirements for the native white pines?
For all the pines, they really want to be in full sun, and they like to have good air movement around them. If they're in less than full sun, they will tend to get open and leggy. They'll survive, That's a white pine will grow as an understory tree until another tree falls down and the sun gets to them. And now they take off and fill that space. But up to that point, they're really leggy and nothing special.
Okay.
Full sun is best.
That makes sense. Yeah. Okay. One more. The first white-tipped hemlock you mentioned, maybe it was Gentsch.
It's white.
Is that vulnerable to the woolly Adelgid that we're dealing with?
When we look at woolly Adelgid, if they have a choice on feeding, they would go with the deep green colors. So they're not real keen on yellow ones or variegated ones or any of that. The other part is Adelgid lives in species hemlocks, which are going to be very tall. And Adelgid, when it gets onto a hemlock, it takes a while for it to colonize before you even notice it's on top of the leaf structure and you don't notice that it's there. The little buggers suck out juice and put in a little toxin. And once there's enough numbers of them, then all of a sudden you notice that the tree is under duress. So unless you plant hemlocks under affected hemlocks, the chances of getting Adelgid onto other hemlocks is pretty low, and it's very easy to control. Soapy water will do it. There are systemics. There's some very reasonable chemicals that are out there that the biome in the soil makes them go away. It gobbles them up. So when you use a chemical, it's a systemic. It goes into the plant. It's taken up through the plant, kills the nasty buggers that are on it, and then in the soil, it vanishes. It's handy to have that.
Okay. That's great. Thank you so much, Michael. And John will continue on.
It sounds like a lot of these trees are varieties of our native trees, and you've been growing a lot of them here. You've been propagating them here. Let's talk for a minute about that. I particularly want to talk about grafting. I know that as a fruit tree grower, one of my cautions was always to make sure that we kept the graft above ground level so we don't get sports growing out of the graft. Are these trees grafted?
These trees are grafted, and we have to be concerned about that. The graft is here. Sometimes latent buds will sprout. And if we see those, if they're just starting to swell, we can take our thumb and do that. It's called bud rubbing, and we make the bud go away. If it's already come out and started to grow, we can take a pair of shears and just prune it off at the base.
Amazing. And just looking around here as we were walking through, it looks to me like almost everything in here is grafted.
The pines, for the most part, need to be grafted.
What's it grafted onto? Why does it need to be grafted?
Because we can't propagate it any other way. We can't take a cutting of a pine and put it in the soil, even if we dip it in a hormone, and won't develop a root. So in order to propagate and make sure that we have the exact same plant, we graft it. In this case, we would graft it on another white pine. But there are times, now that we have the climate change, we have the opportunity to graft this onto a Mexican white pine. So instead of a Pinus strobus, we graft it onto Pinus strobiformis, which is Mexican white pine, which just means it's going to be more heat tolerant. It's going to be just as cold tolerant, but now we can grow this in Atlanta, where white pine in Atlanta is going to struggle. So we can make things more adaptable to a wider range of climates.
How common is this? If I go into a nursery somewhere else, a big box store nursery, a more common kind of nursery, am I likely to find grafted plants? And if I do, what am I looking for?
It all depends again on the plants, but in particular, pines and a lot of spruces need to be grafted. And if they're being sold in big box, it just means somebody like me who grows them for the big box did the same treatment, because you couldn't have this product to sell if you didn't produce it this way.
Okay, so it's not a particular specialty. If I'm buying a tree like this almost anywhere, it's going to be grafted.
I guess the other thing to pay attention to is if it's grafted, look where the union is and look how cleanly it looks like it's being done. It'll be obvious, it'll be apparent. If you can't hardly tell where that's been grafted, the plant took the graft really well.
We're looking at this one again because that graft is really clear. And what I'm seeing here as a non-expert is that the stem and the graft piece are about the same size. It looks clean. There's no wounds there. Is that what I should be looking for?
That's exactly right. This is Himalayan white pine. This has been crossed. Somebody crossed pollen. And then they took the seeds from that and became this. This is whitethorse. This is Himalayan white pine. It'll finish probably someplace around 20 feet. When it's all finished with trying to get bigger and bigger, it's going to have big, long cones at a very early age. It has some of the largest, longest needles of any of the pine trees. Has a wonderful color that's going to stand out from all the other pines. There's nobody that looks like this. In order to have this plant, we have to cut pieces directly off of this and graft them. So above the graft union, now it's this. And these are going to be essentially clones. They're going to be exactly the same as their mom.
As we're walking up the path here, I'm seeing just a lot of trees growing on the bank on the back of this nursery. I bet that there's a story about some of these.
There most certainly is. As we look onto the bank, the tallest thing that's there, the big weepy guy, that's an Alaskan yellow cedar. This botanically is Cupressus noctensis pendula, Alaskan yellow cedar, weeping. And if we go far left, we see one with wings. So the guy with the wings, that's his little sister. They're the same age. They got planted on the same day. One just grows much faster and different than the other one. And that one's called green arrow. Those are probably about 30 years old. And if you look where the green arrow is, up the hill behind that, there's another green thing that's growing. That's Cryptomeria. That's Giokumo. That's what we use for hedging plants. If we want to screen your neighbors out, we use that character. He works in the shade, he works in the sun, he doesn't care about nothing.
How old do you think that one is?
He's 30 years old. They all went in about 30 years ago. And he'll grow in the shade. You can see that he's growing into the oak, and the two of them are friends. So they're not battling it out. And then if we come forward to that, the light gray thing, that's a deodorus cedar. That's called compacta. And again, none of these things have been pruned or trimmed. This is just the way that they grow on their own. And if we go again into the base of the Alaskan yellow cedar, we find this big round ball. That's a white pine. That's called Macopan.
I've never seen one that's a ball.
And that's the way he grows. Again, we have done nothing to him. We just let him grow. When we started this, we really didn't have an idea how big things were going to get because nobody had things that were this old. We started out with tiny little things. And the other thing is durability. The things that we have planted in the ground, we tend for the first 2 years. We baby them. We give them water. We give them fertilizer. We do all the right things. And after that time period, they never get watered or fertilized again. This is how they grow on their own. So these guys have been through the droughts, and they've been through the sub-zero temperatures, and they've been through all the things that weather throws at us. And they're doing just fine. Durability has so much to do with this choice of plant material. This stuff lasts. If it's planted properly and it's tended for the first couple of years, once it gets established, it doesn't want to have any attention. Sometimes people put these things in the ground and they think they need to consistently water and fertilize. And then they get too big too fast for the area they want. So one of the ways to help restrict that is let them grow at their own cadence.
Shapes of weeping, of columnar. I'm overwhelmed. If I'm looking for a conifer, I have a yard, it's full of perennials. I say, okay, I need winter interest. I need something different. Where do I start? How do I pick one?
Probably the best thing to do would be to go to an arboretum and walk around the arboretum, because the plants that live there are going to be plants that are going to live at your yard. And you're going to be able to see what they look like when they get older. Neighborhoods have garden walks. It helps you to key in on the things that you like and how other people do it. It makes things a lot more sensible when you see how things are done that way. If you have to go into this wide open eyes, that can become problematic because it's overwhelming. And often we ask people, don't buy plants. Come back and look again, because you're going to be overwhelmed with the choices that you have. And you're not going to be able to glean enough information to be able to make good decisions when you initially come. So homework is a real important thing. We suggest that you come and take pictures of tags and labels and take them home and put them on the computer and find out what other people talk about. How big did it get? There are arboretums and growers that information is on there for free. And you get a chance to see how other people do things. Doing homework is a very important thing. Otherwise, you're in over your head, and a couple of years later, you're dissatisfied with what you have done to yourself. That would be my testament to this.
Let's talk about some specific applications for these trees. Often the problem comes up of screening, and we're concerned about getting the screen, getting some good growth on it in a reasonable period of time. Tell me about using these trees as screening.
To use these trees as screening, you have to be patient, or else you have to buy large plants. You have to make sure you have enough room overhead, so the plant's not going to get into trouble with the utility company. And so that's reasons that we try to figure things grow in any given year, so we know how big they're going to get and how fast they're going to get to that place. Big green things, that's a smagrud, emerald green arborvitae. That we see behind, that's arborvitae again. That's called George Peabody. They're all the same age, but we're looking at things that are 30, 35 years old. And they went in, they were probably in the neighborhood of 18 inches. You have to plan what your budget is going to be and how big of a screen you start with, but then you have to anticipate how big they're going to get, and if that's going to be a problem, how long before it's not. And then you can plant another screen on the front side of them and then take them out when they get too big. So it's like succession planning. Screening is like that, and all those things can be grown so that they grow together. The problem is when they grow together, you can't take one of them out of there, because where they have grown into each other, that foliage isn't there anymore. So now you just have sticks. It'd be bare, and it is unattractive to the point of, oh, if you're going to take one, you should take them all out. Once you have that background, you can put anything you want in the foreground from that. And it buys them time to be able to grow and to give you a secondary screen. That's what screening is all about. It's time and patience, or else it's money and buying bigger plants. The other thing that happens is when you take a plant and you move it from the nursery to your house, it's going to be about 2 years before it ever starts to show that it's growing. It's taken its time to develop root system, and it doesn't really care how much it puts on the upper part. Everything about the plant is going to be what's in the root, and it's going to take at least 2 years for the roots to get established before the plant grows at this cadence that you were waiting for. So it's going to take time even for it to get established.
Let's talk about that a minute. Let's talk about how one would properly transition one of these plants. These are in 2-gallon, 3-gallon pots.
So if you're going to plant this, ideally, all the soils in western North Carolina are going to be clay. So you're going to want to dig a hole 2 to 3 times as wide as this plant, as wide as the bucket, but you want it to be the same depth as the bucket or a little bit higher. You want it to not disturb the soil that's underneath the plant. You want it to be on a pedestal. When it's finished, you want it to be 2 to 3 inches proud of the rest of the soil that's around it. When you dig the hole, we're going to call that backfill. You're going to add organic matter to that backfill. You're going to add compost. You're going to add bark. It's going to be the topsoil that this plant is going to be growing in for the next 5 to 10 years. You want it to be proud from the ground that it's in. It allows it to decide where it's going to put its roots. And it's going to choose to put the roots higher because it doesn't want to be at ground level. If we have wet years, it's hurricane season and it rains. And then a couple of days later, it rains again. And a couple of days later, it rains again. All of a sudden, the soils are soggy. If the soils are soggy, it's easy to develop root rot, which means that your plant is not going to be able to survive.
What if I had a plant that was 2 years old, maybe I just put it in my clay just at ground level? Can I save it now?
You can. Best time to do that would be to dig it from Thanksgiving through the early part of March. That's going to be dormancy for that plant. The plant can give up some root, a little bit of root. So you're going to dig that plant and try to disturb as little of the root as possible. You can lift it out of the hole and do what we just talked about, adding amendments to the hole. And when you go to plant it, make sure that it's above the ground again. I deal with a lot of people on Facebook, and they'll have plants that have been in the ground for 10, 15 years, and all of a sudden the plant dies. I suggest that they dig it up and see what the root looks like. And it most always is going to be root rot. It's just that we have more water coming more often, and the plant lived for the longest time and it was never a problem. Now it's becoming a problem. Treat the plant nicely. When you get into winter, go ahead and dig the plant, make the adjustments, put the plant back in. Winter is when the plants develop roots. If we're going to plant, we want to plant from September through, now that we don't have frozen ground anymore, it doesn't freeze here. So you can plant from the 1st of September through March, because at that time, that's when the plant is pushing roots. And then it stops doing that and it goes into summer, and that's when it puts out flowers and it puts on new growth. So all of its attention is going to the upper portion of the plant. You really don't want to do anything when you do that in the winter. You don't want to do anything to stimulate that growth. Hopefully the plant is healthy enough for all the other attention that you paid to it, that it has residual energy, it will take care of itself. When you get to the spring and new growth comes out on its own, so we wait until the new growth pushes all by itself. That's when we fertilize. So you don't want to fertilize before that, because plants get dumb sometimes. And if it gets warm in the middle of winter and we get rain and you have fertilized, they start to think that it's spring, and they're going to try to come out of dormancy and start to grow again. And then all of a sudden we're back down to 1 degree and you have just sent his faith. If you have a choice and you see at this time, the 1st of September, that you're going to be moving this plant, perhaps Miracle Grow as a foliar feed. Miracle Grow, a tablespoon to a gallon. Miracle Grow is a wonder drug.
You have to add any soap, detergent to it to get it to...
No, and Miracle Grows, for the most part, is going to be absorbed in the first 48 hours. And so it's not so much we're trying to get it into the roots as we're trying to get it into the foliage. So now it's going to translocate into the roots. The other thing that Miracle Grow does is it reduces stress. And that's what we're all about, is trying to reduce stress when we move things. Whenever you're digging or whenever you're planting, we do all the things we just talked about. But then when everything is finished and it's been watered into the soil, the last thing we do is to make up a tank of Miracle Grow and spray the foliage.
Let's pause here and see what questions our participants have.
Wow, this is just so great. I just wanted to pick up on what you were just talking about, Michael, you and John, about the Miracle Grow. We're talking about transplanting something that's been in the ground and moving it. And you're talking about using a foliar application of Miracle Grow after you've moved it. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay.
Yeah, and it really does work to relieve stress on a plant. It has something to do with all of the micronutrients, the boron, the manganese, and all the trace elements that you may or may not have in your soils. And it just helps to relax them.
Okay. Okay. There's a question about, would it help to root prune a mature conifer before you move it?
Always. If you have
Always.
that choice. But now when you root prune, what you're ideally doing is stimulating fibrous root back behind where you make the cut. And now you have a good root set for that transition. But if you're going to root prune, you usually want to try to start 18 to 24 months ahead of time, so that the physiology of the plant has a chance to do what you're anticipating it doing.
That makes sense. Yeah, 18 to 24. Yeah, so you want to, not a couple of weeks,
Not a
but
couple of weeks. And watering is always the imperative. If you're going to be doing one root pruning or doing pruning, and you're going to put a plant under stress, to hydrate it. They metabolize and they'll heal faster. They'll tolerate what you do to them better. So watering is always a key element to this whole thing.
yeah. It's always tricky. Somebody brought in a sample yesterday of Norway spruce, and it was drought symptoms. I think we tend to ignore that. Even in the winter, we can have dry periods and conifers suffer.
It's true.
Yeah.
And that's that time of the year. The sun is out, the wind is blowing. They're still desiccating. They're still putting off moisture. And especially when they're young, in the first couple of years, we see that. And hydration is really good. You can use things like wilt-proof and some of the other, but if you pay attention and just water, you shouldn't need to do that. The other thing that we do, as a matter of course, if we know a nor'easter is coming in the middle of winter and there's going to be cold temperatures and winds, we try to hydrate everything at least 1 week before the event happens, while the water still runs through the hoses and they're not froze and the ground's still accepting water. But to help to hydrate things before we know they're going to go under stress is beneficial as far as the plant's concerned.
There's a question about the ratio of Miracle-Gro to water for foliar spray.
Always read the instructions on anything that you use, but it says it on the box, 1 tablespoon to the gallon of water, and that's pretty much the application for Miracle-Gro.
Okay. Backing up again about fertilizing. You talked about fertilizing when new growth starts, correct?
That is absolutely correct.
And we're only talking about helping the plant establish. Is that correct?
So there's a couple ways to look at that. One is if you put smaller plants in and you want them to grow faster, we try to suggest that when you put the plants in for the first 18 to 24 months, you baby them. You give them the water once a week. You make sure you give them 1 inch of water once a week. You fertilize them. Essentially, it's going to go towards the roots, and the roots are everything for plants. In the spring, when things start to come out on their own, is when we fertilize. Again, if we fertilize earlier, because we're going to try to get that task out of the way so we don't have to do it later, all of a sudden it gets warm and it rains and the new growth is forced out and it's early, and all of a sudden we get a cold temperature. We saw that 2 or 3 years ago at Christmas, 70 before Christmas Day, -1. Everybody lost some plants. We lost a handful of them. So we know that's true. If you can avoid that by simply not shooting yourself in the foot, that's good.
That's a great explanation. And, I think we tend to forget that, but it's important to remember. Are we talking just about a general complete fertilizer, low analysis, high in phosphorus? What do you recommend for conifers?
Ideally, on installation, we're looking for something with a higher phosphorus count, where phosphorus count is going to go towards the root development again. Once plants are established, if you feel you must or you want to fertilize because you just know it's going to be happier if you fertilize it, a general 10-10-10 or 14-14 is fine. You can go the extra extent. You can go to a time-release fertilizer, Osmocote, and get 6 months. But a lot of times, people, when they use they don't understand what fertilizer is going to do. And you anticipate the plant to get not too big in your garden. And if you love it too much, it ends up overgrowing its space, and now you have a conundrum. So, best once things get started on their own after that first 2-year period. Again, here at the nursery, not the things in containers, but everything that's planted gets ignored essentially. Sometimes we'll have extremely drought periods, either in the winter or in the summer. And if we feel nervous about that, we'll water. We'll do supplemental watering. But for the most part, we try to stay away from that. All the plants that were here have gone through those times and they survive. And again, that's the other thing to be said is that conifers are not going to tell you when they're thirsty. They don't say a thing. All of a sudden they turn brown. So the finger in the soil is probably a real good indicator whether things are dry or not and should be watered.
Excellent. Yeah, I'm glad we're still recommending that timely, truly tested method of finger in the ground. That's really the best way to handle that. Okay, I have one more before we go on. You mentioned the weeping blue spruce. Is it prone to needle cast like other blue spruces are?
To my best understanding, they are less prone to that. But if you have needle casts in an area, that's a microclimate. That is going to be in the area. And depending on what the climate does and that microclimate does, it will or won't affect blue spruce. But I mean, we see needle casts on white pines. We see needle casts on blue spruce, on Norway spruce. It all depends on that microclimate. And anymore, with the way we don't have winters to bring those kind of things under control. We can't control insects. We can't control what goes on with the metabolism in plants, if they don't get a chance to go dormant during the winter, and we haven't seen full dormancy for the last 2 or 3 years. As far as plants are concerned, then the plants are the host for the fungus and the insects. So the insects are not affected and fungus is not so much affected. So if it's a problem in your area, you may want to rethink, talk with the ag extension agent, find out if you're finding it in your area, and then maybe make other choices than the plants that are having problems. There's a lot that are not having problems.
Yeah. We see it a lot on really larger, older trees. And I think the site and the location is an important comment. I had one more question before we go on to the final part. You mentioned about looking at going to Arboreta and botanical gardens, especially Arboreta. Can you just recommend where in the US have really good collections? Like if we're traveling and we're really fascinated, wanting to explore conifers in that kind of setting.
Well, one of my favorite places is the National Arboretum in Washington. It's been around for a very long time, and they have tried everything. They have been donated, bequeathed, things that they shouldn't have even bothered to try to put in the ground, but it confirms that it's not going to work there. You have a very central climate. It's like central United States. So the things that will work there will probably work at your house. The other thing is you get a chance to see what they look like when they have age on them, and you get to see how they mix things together. Ralston Arboretum here in North Carolina is one of the best places. Originally, when we started to do collecting and stuff, we got hooked up with Ralston. We donated some plants. They allowed us to come and take cuttings. So much of what we have here at the nursery was propagated out of Ralston in that zone 8. So we hope to cover that. So Ralston does that really well.
Good, good. I know that Denver Botanic Garden has a very extensive collection, but that's the Rockies. It's a whole different setting than what we have.
Morton Arboretum, up and down the East Coast, there's a lot of, there's just a bunch. There's so many.
We have another question, but let's move on to this final segment.
Several of the things I know you've talked about here have been in these pots for years. They're slow growing enough. What about growing these in pots? How do these guys do in pots? Are there any that you could particularly recommend for pot culture?
I have to tell you the truth is that all of these guys are in containers. So all of this stuff would work in containers. These guys are going to stay in containers. They'll grow in this size container for 2, 3, or 4 years. And then we pull them out of the container and see how tight the roots are in the container. We can take a pruning saw and score the root system in 4 or 5 places and across the bottom, and it acts as a root pruning agent. Now we can put them back into the pots and grow them on for another year or 2. You can do these plants, once you get them home, in containers for 3 to 5 years. Then you can step them up in size and do them again for another 3 to 5 years. When they get too big, you can donate them. You can donate them to a church. You can donate them to a worthy agency that can use these things, and then start again with something else. So container garden we have a lot of people that come here specifically for that.
Let's go back out front again for a minute, because when we came in, we saw some of these plants growing in a beautiful mounded bed, a raised bed. And we were talking about the problem of growing these just in flat ground. Michael, tell us about this bed and why this is here and how this is working.
We dug the pond. We took the extra soil that we had and we created these hillocks or mounded areas. So this is the soil that lives here, except now it's raised. And as we plant these, we add organics into the hole that they're in. So you can see they're doing really well.
So this is not just a giant mound of compost. This is the native soil.
That's exactly right. And that's what we did here. We had a landscape business and we would do new homes. And the bulldozer man would come in and take all the topsoil away and sell it to somebody else. Now we were stuck in the subsoil. So we would bring in soil and create hillocks just where we were going to plant specifically, and not the entire yard. And then plant them in the same fashion as we did here. You don't have to bring truckloads of soil in order to be able to plant. But if you have this situation, and most people in this area do, it's going to be clay soil and it's not going to drain very well. You have to make some adjustment in order for this stuff to work. So in the foreground, we see that there's a rain gauge. That rain gauge helps us to keep these guys alive in their initial planting. So the first 2 years at least, to keep a rain gauge in a new bed area is going to go a long ways. And if you feel that you need to water, then you better water.
Would a tree like this tell me, is it going to wilt? Will it tell me that it needs water?
No, and that's the thing about conifers. They're not going to tell you anything until they turn brown. You have to be able to anticipate and pay attention.
And
Brown is too late.
I see a ground cover that's very attractive, as in gold. It's flat. It looks like a juniper that is flatter and more interesting than any I've ever seen before. Tell me about that.
That is a variety of a blue rug June. That's called motherlode. Do you want the story? I'll try to make it short. John Isley's nursery in Oregon had a bed that was like this at the end of a bunch of houses. And in that bed, he put maples and he put blue rug juniper. After a few years, one of the maples got struck by lightning. They pulled the maple out and they replaced it. The next spring, when new growth came out on the blue rug that was associated with that plant, the tip was gold. Not the rest of the plant and nothing else in there. Nobody knows why, but that's what it did. So Jean propagated that. And the rule is if you find a new anomaly, you have to document what you know about it, take pictures. You have to tell everything that you can for 7 years. And after 7 years, if it doesn't revert, it's genetically stable. You take that information, put it into the National Arboretum. They run it through their archives, see if there's anything that's like that. If not, you get to name it. John named it motherlode.
Is this one that you propagate here?
Oh, yes.
We're looking at some other trees here, and they're each one interesting, each one unique in its place in your landscape. This one with the cone on it particularly caught my eye. Tell us about that one.
This is Pinus flexilis. It comes out of Colorado. It does this to shed snow. So that's how it lives in the mountains of Colorado. It grows about 9 to 10 inches a year. It has very interesting growth. It's this esoteric growth. This one we can tell that's probably around 12 to 13 years old because now it's putting out new cones. So last year it put out a cone and the cone was about the size of an egg. And this year it elongated and now it has seed. So again, this is when the birds take advantage of it. This is chickadees and titmice and all the little characters that come and feed off of these things. And we look for this sort of thing, some kind of esoteric movement in the trunk. So it's not just a pencil that's going up. Sometimes people find that interesting. When people come into the garden and they see weird things, they want to know about the weird things.
Okay, speaking of weird things, I'm right here. I'm looking at this little thing, and this, I'm sure, is a gymnosperm, but no needles.
This is a ginkgo, and the ginkgo is a member of that whole family, the gymnosperm family. This is called Thelma, and Thelma has a tubiform leaf. Most ginkgo are going to have this standard leaf, but this is tubiform, which makes this different. This plant will get 20 to 25 foot tall and broad, and when we get to frost time, usually around Thanksgiving, it's going to turn brilliant butter-colored gold, and the leaves are going to persist for 3 to 4 weeks. And then with all the ginkgos, you go to sleep, and you wake up the next morning, and all the leaves just fell off.
You have a gold carpet.
Then you have
under
a
that tree.
wonderful gold carpet.
Is this tree as durable as our standard variety ginkgo that we see planted here and there?
Yes, sir. Same plant, same everything. It's just another one of those things that became an anomaly on a plant. Someone noticed it, someone propagated it, it persisted, and then they continued to grow it. Somebody found it fascinating to do that. And it has all the attributes that a regular ginkgo would have, except for it doesn't grow as fast, and it has this unique foliage.
What else do we have here that would be something I hadn't seen before that would just jump out in my garden that I should be aware of? I know you love each and every one of these, but pick a couple that are near and dear to your heart.
I'm not allowed to have a favorite. I love them all. I brought these out because this is ground cover, and these are ground covers. The little gold guys are those that we looked at in that bed, and that's mother lode. And they grow much slower than a regular blue rug juniper. This little guy, this is Siberian arborvitae. So this we use as a ground cover, and it wants to be in the shade here. It doesn't want to be in the full sun. Most of the time, ground covers really want to be in full sun in order to produce, but this guy does not want to be in full sun. He can get a little scorch, so he needs to be in the shade. And even in dark shade, he works fine. Microbiota. And this, we talked about Cryptomeria. That's as tall as Koshi gets. And they love the shade, and they love abuse, and they love water, but they don't have to have water. Anyway, so this is Koshi. Earlier we were talking about candle growth. And so this is called silver candles. This is Pinus uncinata, which is a subspecies of amugo pine. But in particular, it's the candles. And the candles are going to be the growth for the next year. In the spring, when this is ready to push new growth, these candles are going to elongate. And when they elongate, they have this little netting around them. So if you want to control how big pines get, all the pines are going to have candle growth. So you can, in the spring, when they're growing, pinch up to 50% of that growth. You pinch 50% of that growth, you have reduced the size that this thing is going to grow by 50%. And we talk about candle pinching because when we pinch, we close off the capillary action. If we cut it with a pair of pruners, it will bleed sap out of the top of that. So we actually pinch it.
Just as a practical matter, a lot of pinching.
It is a lot of pinching. You have to love it. Or some of the other plants don't have as many, or just let it go. And ideally, most of the time, people just let it go. But if you're going to put a plant in a specific area and you don't want it to get too big too fast, you have that as an option.
Let's talk about that question for a minute, because we use the term dwarf, we use the term miniature. And for me as a gardener, one of the challenges is always knowing the difference between a plant that is going to stay small and a plant that's just small because it grows slowly. How can I tell the difference?
In the vernacular, in the conifer world, a miniature plant is a plant that grows 1 inch or less in a year. A dwarf plant is one that grows between 1 and 6 inches in growth in a year. So that's a wide variable, but that's what they've given us. Intermediate is something that grows 6 to 12 inches a year, and anything that grows more than 12 inches a year is large.
But some of these are going to get large, but they're just slow growing. Is that correct?
We talked about terminal growth, and that's going to determine how much it's going to grow in a year. And usually you can tell terminal growth even on the smallest of plants. If they're old enough to be sold, you're going to be able to see terminal growth on them. So that's going to preordain the plant to how much it's going to grow in a year. So we have this little character. This is a miniature. This is called Jervis. This is a miniature hemlock, an eastern hemlock. So this is a native hemlock. But growth on this guy, terminal growth is right about there, almost a ½ inch a year. This guy is over 30 years old.
30 years old, he's in the pot, and he's 8 to 10 inches tall and 12 or 14 inches across. That is a tiny plant.
That's about as small as they get. But he hasn't had any cones on him. We don't know if he ever will develop cones. It may not be in his makeup to be able to flower and then have cones. But this is him. He's our mascot.
There's two things I'm hearing here. Partly, there are things that have just interesting winter interest. The color is different. They form cones. Some of these things are geometrically interesting, that they stay low and flat. They get tall. So I'm looking at one here that for a small plant in a small pot is just covered with cones.
And this is called koru. And this is a Japanese white pine. They cone at an early age. One of the things that we like about it, other than the cones, is that it grows in an esoteric fashion. It doesn't grow straight up. It will start to develop a little swag left and then a swag right. And if you look, it's a mixture of blue and white needles. So it makes it look much lighter than it might otherwise look. Those cones will persist probably into the spring, and then the plant will probably push the cones off and make room for more branches to come out or other flowers to come out.
Next to it now is someone who's another extreme. It's extremely narrow. Notice too, just before we forget about it, right here at the top are a couple of little cones forming. Okay, this is native white pine. We'll actually stand beside that. We can just see it in perspective compared to you. Put your arm around it like it's your new best friend. There you go. It's extremely narrow.
Stowe pillar. Stowe, S-T-O-W-E, pillar. And it is quite the pillar. And these guys have been through the winters, and they don't have any problem with snow loads. They're narrow enough, and they're firm enough that they don't break limbs. They don't do any of that stuff.
Where in a garden would you typically see something like this?
This could be the accent on either end of a house. This could be an accent out in a garden so that you're drawing attention to that particular area. Almost any place, at the end of a driveway, any place that you have headroom, but you don't have a lot of width to be able to put something in. And you could use these in series of 3 or 5 of them and create an interesting visual. And whether you use it to block something out or you just use it showing your creativity in a garden. So this is Chinese juniper called Plumosea aurea. This will get maybe 4 to 5 feet tall. It grows in a 45-degree angle. It would get 6 to 8 feet wide. Essentially that. And as they gain weight, they will start to get lower, but just a little bit. They won't be ground huggers. But it, again, is the kind of thing that lightens a whole area up. It's a thing that brings your eye to it. So this is an arborvitae. This is the Groot spire. This is going to get 20 to 25 foot tall, and it will be maybe 4 foot wide. Could be used as a screening tree. Again, it's a wonderful place. As the season goes on for us, we find in the spring, we'll find birds' nests inside here. So a lot of this is a wonderful place for birds to live. But this in particular is exactly what they're looking for. And this is arborvitae. This will work in the shade or the sun. This is a native plant. They're tough as nails. Once they get established, they don't care. It's like the great big arborvitaes we see in the field. Yeah, and these guys here.
So you said this will grow in the sun or the shade?
Under the shade.
Shade is an interesting term because we have all kinds of different shade. I'm looking at trees over here that are growing in full sun and seem perfectly happy. How do you distinguish between degrees of shade? How much sun are we talking about for many of them?
Okay, so when we're talking about sun and shade, we're talking about sun and shade in the growth period. So from late March until August, when the plant is putting on growth, that's when we're concerned of how much sun does something get. Full sun would be 6 hours or more. 4.5 hours to 6 hours would be part. Anything less than that would be shade. You don't want to overestimate and you don't want to underestimate. So that's a pretty important thing. We don't count the winter when the leaves are off the trees because the plants are asleep at that time. So it is when the growth period is on and they're in the process of growing that we have to pay attention to how much sun.
As these things grow in our garden successfully, they start getting too big. And I just hate to go in and take out a tree that's been there for 15 or 20 years because I planted it as a child. I know it and love it. What can I do with it when it starts getting just out of hand? How can I change that?
On this tree, it grew to the ground, and we took some of the limbs off up for about 2 or 3 feet to show the architectural feature of the tree itself. Now it changes the whole tenor of this. You can see what the bark looks like. And during the on season, it's almost a reddish bark and it's flaky. And all of a sudden there's a contrast between what it's growing on that you didn't see before and the rest of the tree. So you can do that, and you can do it a little bit at a time. You're not pressed into doing anything immediately. The best time to do that kind of pruning is any time from September through March, and you can take up to 20% of the foliage off if you want to.
Speaking of pruning, can I shorten back branches? Is it safe to do that for the most part, or am I going to get in trouble?
If you shorten back branches, then the tips aren't getting the sun, and chances are that branch is going to end up dying. So if you're going to shorten a branch, it may be better to take the branch off at the trunk and just remove that branch.
If I need to make it narrower, it's occupying too wide a space, can I prune it all the way around?
So the answer is yes, but then there's a whole pruning question about aesthetics. So you can just go around and prune it. If it's this kind of foliage, you can take this off and you still have foliage behind it. But if it's pines, all the foliage is out here. And if you take this out, there isn't any foliage back here. Some of them will back bud, and that means that when you take this off, it will stimulate growth on the back here. Yeah. But most of them will not be like that.
If I have something like this, if I took 8 inches off of this, I still have quite a bit behind it. These little guys will grow and it'll be fine. Okay.
Absolutely.
So a gradual, delicate pruning might be better than a real serious whack job.
Yeah, a pair of pruners is always a better attack. And it allows you to just take pieces off, and then you can step back. And then you can always move back in and decide, where does it look like, oh, I need to take more off. So that's probably the safest way to go about it.
Now we're up the hill looking at some more mature plants. What about this one, Michael?
So this is Taxodium. You can see that he has a stake underneath him to help to give him some elevation. After a couple of years, we can take that stake out. The cellular structure of the tree will form to give it enough oomph to hold it up. This guy's probably 30 years old.
It's a weeper, so it's not going to get much taller.
If we were to stake it, we could make it as tall as we wanted to make it, but it wouldn't be this graceful. And it grows. It's back to that terminal growth. This is terminal growth for this plant for 1 year. This is 2.5 feet. Yep, this is what it does on a year. And again, it's established. We don't water, we don't fertilize, we don't do any of those things.
With that much terminal growth, since it's weeping, do you have to come and cut that growth off?
At some point, it may become obnoxious. But if we can keep staking it, we might be able to do something creative with it. And we can help that. And we may prune up some of the skirt again to allow for the other things that are in here. This is Taxodium again. And this one's probably around 18 years old. And this is the way he grows, but again, we raise the skirt. We took the bottom limbs off, and he's going to probably get much bigger than we want him to, so we'll keep him as long as we can keep him. But he's too pretty not to.
Even here in the first week of September, the new growth on it just looks clean and crisp.
And that's what they do.
We have seen, Michael, a remarkable array of conifers, of evergreens, of golds and blues and greens that are different shapes and different orientations of trunks that wobble. You must have 500 different things growing out there. If a person wanted to come up here and just wander around, would you welcome visitors here? You welcome customers here?
We do. And often when people come, if they haven't been here before, I'll walk with them and show them how to find labels and prices. And then they can walk around and just find the things that interest them. And a lot of times, if we're not busy, I can spend time and walk around. But the grounds are pretty much open.
There are just so many different things to see and such an array of shapes, of ages of things, seeing how things look in 30 years. It's just remarkable. And I'm really glad that you took the time to have us come up here and help us walk around with you and tell us the stories about these trees that you know, you love, and you would like us to all get to know and love also. So
Yes,
thank you
please.
very much.
Thank you. It was a pleasure, and I am looking forward to having new faces come.
Excellent. Well, okay, so we have 2 quick questions. One was about growing a conifer in a pot. It says, when do you recommend root pruning, and can you root prune more than once? I guess that's in order to keep it in the pot.
The answer is true. You probably wouldn't want to disturb roots any more than once every second year. If you're going to grow plants in container, what is recommended is that the plant is hardy. The 2 zones hardier than what you're living in. So we're essentially in zone 7A. So things that would live in zone 5 would do just fine outside, and they don't care about the winter. If you're concerned about them not being hardy enough, as long as the pot's not too big, you can move it into an unheated garage or against a protected wall, that sort of thing, until that cold blast moves on. But again, the way winters have been, we're not seeing those kind of temperatures. It's not to say that weather isn't in cycles and we're going to see them again. Most of the plants that we looked at in this video are all going to live outside throughout the winter, and they don't live in heated houses. So we put poly on the houses to keep moisture in them. But if it's outside 0, it's inside 0. So temperature is not as important, except for on those extreme things, anomalies that happen.
There's a lot, the type of pot and everything. There's a lot that is involved in that. Okay, one final question, and you touched on a few. Everybody's really interested in natives. And so can you speak to us about native conifers that you would recommend?
Top of the list, hemlocks. We grow over 20 varieties. They're native. They're as tough a plant as one can own. They come in a myriad of colors, variegations, gold, weeping, ground covers, or they come in trees. So that'd be number one. White pines are native, and we saw a fair amount of the varieties of white pines. We grow a plant that's called Cryptomeria Giokumo, which is an indigenous plant up and down the East Coast, and it's referred to as a white cedar. We do 5 or 6 varieties of that. It's a plant that will finish out after 30 years at 20 to 30 feet tall. Some of them go through coloration when cold weather gets in. So those are 3 off the top of my head. There's so many plants that are here. There's pitch pines and things from up on the Appalachian Mountains. There's a whole array of things that we've never even talked about.
Okay, great. I just want to thank you so much, Michael, for coming, letting John come and have this conversation with you, creating the video. Thank you, John, for your expertise and helping Michael share so much with us today. Thank you so much, Michael.
Thank you. That was fun. John made this thing happen. So I'm happy about that. I just had to follow his lead.
That's great. Yeah, such a great world of plants that I think we could all benefit from bringing into our landscape. I want to thank everybody for joining us today, and we hope you have a great day in the garden. Thank you.